Welcome to the Baluch podcast, Dave. Please introduce yourself.
My name's Dave Messner. I'm a real estate developer in St. Louis, and I'm here to give advice as best as I can.
Okay, so the first question I have is what first inspired you to pursue a career in real estate and community development?
So it actually came later in life. I think growing up, I had an interest and an idea in real estate and communities and observing how they grow. But I never really knew that that was something I could do or what that might look like. And I knew there were people in real estate who were real estate agents. I knew that there were people who sold real estate, but growing up, development is something that no one quite tells you to do. And I would say for most people, it probably shouldn't be your first job because it's such a multidisciplinary field that to go straight from university or high school straight into that, uh, you may get lucky and do it, but I think the real best ones have done a number of other things before that. So for anybody who's thinking, what should I do? Having this existential question early in life, I think the answer is the the way that you should be thinking about it, which is different than the way you've been told to think about it, is the younger you are in life and the fewer commitments you have in life, the more you're able to make bets on yourself that might in the future have an asymmetric return. And I think we've gotten to a place now, given a lot of the economic uncertainty, that there's an expectation that I have to be highly successful right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And there is an element of that which is true, but there is an element of that which is what you need to have is one of two things, in my view, either a deep specialty, so think like a specialty physician, right? That is a very high expertise role, or even a very specific engineering field where and that is only, in my view, if you can be like the top 10% in the world of that field, right? So a very special qualification. I think for most others, the way they need to think about it is accumulating skills. And that sounds very vague, but that would be things that, especially as you look forward, not what people are saying they needed in the past, but as you look forward, I think young people inherently know a lot of the things that will be valuable by the time they leave university that they can see both the older generation does not have, but they're uniquely or natively inclined to be able to do. And I think social media, it particularly like TikTok and the sharing of content is something that younger generations are culturally attuned to do far more than like I'm technically a geriatric millennial. So I was in university when Facebook was only for universities. And the way we share and the way young people share and the intersection of marketing culture and media like that is totally different. And even from where I
Yeah.
sit now, I think that's going to probably change in the next year or two as, younger Gen Z and Gen Alpha starts to decide that maybe we're going to go back to analog and unplug a lot. Um, but I think as young people, you're more attuned to seeing kind of what's right over the horizon. But you get funneled into this corporate environment or this employment environment that can only kind of look down and see their feet, and they can kind of see tomorrow,
Yeah.
not over the horizon. So I made a point earlier about how important it is to be successful right out of the gate. One of the lessons that I learned, only in hindsight, with many years of frustration in my career,
Yeah.
is that the one of the most important jobs is your first job, and not your first job that you do to live and survive and work, but it's your first job for two reasons. One is if you are going to go down a track of corporate life, that is, you are somebody who has figured out or kind of knows how to play the game in the sense that you can conform into a corporate environment and that you can thrive in that environment, which is not everybody. then the first job you get is the most important. And what that job needs to do, for as long as you will require an external validation of your skills, that job has to give you a stamp of, it is so obvious to somebody in the world that when you say, oh, yeah, I work for company X, it speaks to who you are, it speaks to your skill set. And that sort of serves as the same like professional stamp as going to the right university does
Yes.
to get that professional stamp. And
Yeah.
but like I said, that is for a very specific kind of person who with the right kind of demeanor and everything else. So for anybody, don't let that upset you, because for anybody else, there is a whole world of opportunities. And I think you mentioned you were in the UK, and I don't know what the
Yes.
circumstances are there for young people. I assume it's perhaps worse, but not that much better than in the States, where we've all just decided that AI can do every entry level job, and then we'll all emerge as 40-year-old managers of something, some dystopian nightmare we don't want a part of.
That's
But for every
basically it here as well.
Yeah, so for everybody else, what I would say is, going back to my earlier point, collect the skills. So, as an example for real estate development and growing up, um, I knew I was interested in real estate, and I knew I was interested in how communities grew. And I knew I was interested in buildings and sort of this observation over time of why is this neighborhood changing this way? What was the not necessarily the policy, but what were the catalysts to change, growth, decline, or otherwise, right? And how were people occupying those spaces? And the what I found, the older I got in life, was that if you can integrate interests like that into the activities or the leisure time that you spend, eventually you will hopefully find yourself at a convergence of those things where, like I said before, when you're young, you can see over the horizon a bit better
Yeah.
than some of the more seasoned executives. And so for me, what that allowed me to do is, throughout my travels across the world, I was viewing things without really being intentional about it, as I wish I would have now. I was viewing the world through the lens of community and real estate development. Why is that building there? How did they do? I remember being in Switzerland, and they have, um, I think it's in Basel, they have this old castle that has this totally modern addition to it. And I remember even at a young age just being so fascinated, like, who would do that? Why would you do that? How do you do that? Um, and then, like I said, as I get older, then I think down to the component parts. So what I wish I would have done when I was much younger. So like if I was 18 again, I would go into the trades and I would learn just good enough skills at those trades that were going to be part of what I wanted to do in the future, or even what I thought I wanted to do in the future. Right. So if
Yeah.
there's anybody who's watching this interview and they're thinking, wow, I think I'd really like to do real estate development or something like that. And you're 20 years old or you're in university, what I would tell you is this. Uh, Go find somebody, if you're in the UK, right? Go find
Yeah.
somebody who will teach you how to be a bricklayer, because chances are there's far more money for you at a modest income level to be a bricklayer and then go rehab an old brick building in the UK than there is necessarily to build a steel and glass building in your 20s,
Yeah.
right? And more importantly is that as you do those trades, you learn how to work with the trades, because on the developer side, it's not all just fundraising and writing checks. You actually have to be able to manage those processes. And the best way to be able to do that is having done it over a long period of time and actually worked in those trades.
Okay, so from what I gathered, like it's more of a journey to get to like basically what you're doing right now, rather than like you always knowing.
Correct. And I think there are people who I think are very fortunate to know,
Mm.
they either know what they want to do, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you've met people who they want to be a doctor, they're suited to be a doctor,
Yes.
they're going to be a doctor and they can do that. Um, but I think I want to be specific on the journey, because I think some people use that as an excuse to let's say lead a directionless or hedonistic lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like, well, I'm just not, they kind of think, well, I'm just on my journey, and the world will manifest my purpose to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong. I mean, I think that is taking away your own agency. And I understand it. I graduated into the global financial crisis, and so I have a lot of empathy for young people today. Uh, even in the standpoint of, like, when I went to school, the promise was still, just go get a degree, and the kind of the corporate world will take care of you, and they'll train you what to do. And since 2008, we've shifted in a really actually more terrible direction, which is, well, we're only hiring people in finance, engineering, and computer science. And if you do any liberal arts degree, good luck being a barista. And what's happened now, is you've seen, is a lot of kids, I'm only from the States, I can tell. So, a lot of kids, they went to MIT and Stanford and studied computer science. And if you graduated a year ago, you might be fine. But if you graduated in June this year, sorry, we have AI to do that now. And so there's no job for you.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, where I felt a seismic shift, at least in the US, for people started to say, hey, wait a minute, like this bargain is not fair, right? We just paid a
Yeah.
bunch of money for this job training degree that certainly will work itself out um, in the long run, but this does not help me live like a any sort of a satisfied life. And so, even to them, what I would say, I would not do what they did to coal miners in the U.S. and basically say, well, we're not going to use dirty energy, learn to code. What I would tell them is, okay, but you have this skill set of computer science. You've been trained to think about problems in a way that is
Analytical way.
different. Yeah,
Yeah.
in a way that is different from all of these other industries. How can, unless you are just not capable of adapting those skills, which is a different problem, what area can you take that methodology of thinking and apply it to different problems? And so I'll go back to my background. I went to university and I studied history. Um, the facts of history are interesting, but they're not practically useful in a business setting.
Yeah.
But the skill set of history is telling stories. It is discerning fact from, the actual facts from a narrative fact, or an observation from a concrete fact, right? And it's being able to think through things like, does this pass the smells test, and is this true? Increasingly, this is important with things that are generated by AI. And I even notice it in my own search, where I'll search for um, something that Google will know that I'm interested in, and it'll feed me back a result that says, oh, yeah, like, you're totally right. No, and I know that it's false. And I'm sure a lot of people have
Yeah.
uh, had that experience. And and so it's back to the journey point. If you can study something, like if you're going to university, and if you study something that you can excel at and that you enjoy, and if you look at it less as, I need to cram all of these facts into my head and remember them forever, which I think is really high pressure. If you think about it as, I am accumulating structures and methods to think through problems that I can adapt to different industries.
Yeah.
I think that will give you a lot more satisfaction and confidence in what you are or are not able to do with your life and the options in front of you. I think where we end up in a big way for people who are totally dissatisfied or totally disillusioned with the job market is this sense that, I studied computer science to go work at company X, and then I didn't get hired, and my life is over.
Yeah.
And what I would tell you very empathetically is that is a cultural phenomenon that is not new, but that has been greatly magnified as the real and perceived opportunity to get hired decreases. Even to get on that first rung of the ladder. Um, and even from where I sit, I can kind of look around at my peers and otherwheres, and I can see them. pulling up the ladder, right? Like
Yeah.
to a point where I look 5 years down the road and I think to myself, you're not hiring any entry level talent because you think that Chat GPT can replace all of that. Well, what's going to happen in 5 years when you want to move on from your role and there's no bench of talent beneath you, or the bench of talent beneath you is totally uninterested in the proposition that you are putting forward? This
Mm.
is going to be a really big problem. And I'm not going to be like what the baby boomers told me, which was, and it's going to be a great opportunity for disruption. I think it's a really big problem, and I think the question will have to be, what is it that we are going to redefine as, let's even say the, I don't know what the dream in the UK was. I think it was in the 70s and 80s. I think it was reasonably similar to the US, right?
Yeah.
Can I get a reasonable job? Can I go down to the pub? Can I live in my house? Can I kind of send my kids to school and they can have uh, a markedly better life than I did growing up, right? And at least at that time, it was, can they like not starve, right? Can there not be domestic crises and things like that? And to me, I think the challenge and the opportunity is in fact, my hope is that people don't have to stay where they are forever.
Yes.
I think the future, and I think even the perceptions from the younger generation, is going to be that their skill set is much more potable, hopefully in a global context. So instead of taking that trip to Bali and just going to the clubs, do that, go to the clubs, go to Bali. Um, but use that trip to think about what is it that I am learning at school, or that I learned in my trade, that I could use, that might be needed here. So can I transfer that skill to a different location, uh, and be successful somewhere else? And maybe not, but I think going down that road will teach you a whole lot more, um, than sitting in whichever city you're in the UK, or in the EU, or even in the US, or
Yeah.
wherever you are, and just kind of banging your head that you can't thrive in your small town because you see people elsewhere doing phenomenally.
Yes. Yeah. So I was curious. You said like you had a history background at uni.
Mhm.
How did you like enter into real estate? What was your first role?
So my first role was, I ended up in sales. I studied history because it was something I was always interested in from a subject matter standpoint. Uh, I did not do well. I paid more. Spent most of my time in uni, uh, socializing and doing internships, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because I had the same, halfway crisis of, I'm studying history because I know that's a generalist skill set.
Mm.
Um, and I am trying to do all these internships because I think if I kind of have a little work record, that it'll make me more appealing once I get out of school. And the answer to that was twofold. One, I was totally wrong, and during the global financial crisis, that value proposition evaporated. But what I wish I would have spent more time doing was finding more people who could tell me what the job actually was. What does the work actually look like? And what are some indirect ways to get into the field that I thought that I might want to get into? So I ended up kind of dipping my toes in a lot of different internship roles. Then my first role was in sales and business development, which, look, if you absolutely must get a job, go find a sales job somewhere. Even if it is, even if it's the most embarrassing sales job you can think of, or the job you walk by the person and you just think, "My man, I'd rather just not be working than doing that." Go do that job, even if it's for 6 months, because you'll have something to do, which is important. You'll be employed, which looks good to the next person trying to hire you. Um, and at the very least, working a sales job, whether in person or virtual, will humble you enough to never quite forget how hard it actually is. And I would say the other part is, there are plenty of people who have, in a lot of ways, do nothing jobs. They are gatekeepers and brokers, uh, between many other people. And those are a lot of the roles that you see getting eliminated, because There's a lot of over efficiency in the market right now.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to the transferable skills. Uh, and the transferable skill is not critical thinking. The transferable skill is to what we were talking about earlier, having that computer science methodology, right? Is there a way of thinking that I can apply to this?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example how this works out in real estate. So with the history degree teaches you, like I said, three things. It's research, discernment of facts, and then telling a story. And that is the core foundation of any real estate development deal. I have to tell a lender the story of what I am doing. I have to do the research on the property. For what I do specifically, it's historic buildings. So knowing the background and the history of the building helps with the redevelopment. And you've got to be able to do the research. You have to be able to go and look through the different sources of information to find whether it's the property owner information or the building information or the permit information. And then there's some tedium to filling it out. And then within there, there's some style to being able to go to a city council and tell them the story and plead your case for why you should be able to do the development. I suspect the U.S. is a little bit is much more uh, for the most part a lot easier to do this in. I suspect in the EU or the UK, it's probably a lot more fraught with details and bureaus and everything
Yeah.
else. And so kind of understanding that process and the technicalities um, will really save you a whole bunch of pain and suffering, especially in my business. And that again is the way that the degree ended up in the long term helping me with that. Um, and part of it was I found that I enjoyed that when I was doing that in uni.
Okay. So you had mentioned earlier, like when you were doing internships to learn like about your passion or what you want to do in the future, you wanted to know like you would have wanted to know like a typical day in the work of any profession. Can you describe a typical day in your work as a developer?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that a little bit different. Day in the life is actually it's actually not very useful. Um, because what you end up with is an answer that tries to generalize the entire role that any person is in.
Mm.
Um, what I always think of is like, what is the actual work product that you are doing? Not
So like what are
necessarily
the
so
key responsibilities in the role?
not not even that because even then it's fake. So I'll give you the example. So like in real estate development, the work product is the finished building.
Yeah.
The work product, even in like brokerage, might be the sale of the house or the sale of the property. Um, but that's not the work, right? The
Yes.
day in the life might be little steps to that. The work is building relationships and building a network to solve problems that are unforeseeable.
Yeah.
So that's the real work. The same way, like an architect, right? You might, and if anybody's an architect, I'm making this up, but an architect, the work product is the blueprints or the
Yeah.
renderings, but the work is solving complicated problems and navigating interpersonal relationships. I guess
Yeah.
structural engineering problems, right? Um, and so what I'm really more curious about the older I get is okay, and then how do you make money doing that? Like what are the core skills and why is it that somebody pays one architect $100 an hour and another one $1,000 an hour,
Yeah.
other than what we sort of know about pricing strategy today, and just $1,000 an hour, we feel better about it. But what is the real difference in the work? And it's not always, everybody can do, especially now with AI, you think we can do a high quality rendering, but how do we do these different things? And so that's what I would be asking. And I think that's a much more insightful question, even if you're doing an interview or anything else, is figure out how to frame it to your audience. But like, what is the work, right? What is the thing that I better be good at to thrive in this business? beyond the technical competencies or otherwise. And going back to the internships, where I think the internships are the best choice, not for somebody trying to figure out what they want to do. Somebody who's trying to figure out what they want to do, you can have a coffee, you can do a Zoom with somebody who will give you some time. I would say if you don't know what you want to do, just go work somewhere. Go work somewhere, make money, and be miserable at it, because that'll force you to think about what you're doing, but it will also alleviate the anxiety of not working and sort of being in distress. If you know what to do, for example, I have a bunch of friends who studied finance. If you know you want to go work at a bank, then and you know what area of the bank you want to be in, then you can spend those internship times, do an internship somewhere with a logo impressive enough to get you to the next logo, to get you to the the finance firm you want to work for, that'll be impressive enough to get you to the MBA program that, or the masters, specialized masters you want to get to, which will get you to the next logo. Because are you, because that instance, you are in a prestige industry, you are not necessarily in a let me self actualize industry. And if you're in a prestige industry, perception matters, your trajectory matters, your brand matters, the same way that all of those other indicators matter more than your ability to come up with a creative finance solution, because they will teach you how to do that once you are there. But you have to have the pedigree to get to the place where they are willing to do that. And it's a signal. And that's a different track that not everybody can go on.
Okay, and I was also curious, like what kind of projects are you most passionate about then, and why?
I'm most passionate about historic redevelopment, so preservation of these historic buildings,
Yeah.
um, particularly ones that are actually significant. I mean, I think sometimes you'll find places where people get really uh, they get really animated about things because they're old. So they're
Yeah.
they're old, so we have to keep them. And in some cases that is true, right? I mean, I think I've seen pictures like in London, like some of the old row houses, right?
Yeah.
Very, very quintessential to the environment of that of that neighborhood. So yeah, even if they just because they're old, you want to keep them because they preserve the neighborhood. That's reason enough. Um, I look all the time, so the algorithms feed me all of these like old chateaus in France and castles in Ireland, and even if you think about like the old estates in the UK, those are the properties that I really love and that I'm really curious about. In the States, we have a lot of like brick and timber warehouses, so probably um, things you would find in the more historically industrial parts of the UK, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
brick and timber warehouses kind of things. And that's what I do. That's my whole business is we have, I think much like parts of the UK and in the EU, we have incentives for preservation of those properties. And we go in and we'll convert them from really just kind of dusty, abandoned buildings into mixed use, where you have some retail on the bottom and apartments on the top. And for me and my work over the last 5 years, the focus has really been doing that at a like a community, or what has kind of been corporate lingo into like a district. So you've 5 or 7 buildings instead of just one building at a time.
Okay, and now the last question I have is that what skills do you think are the most important, like for young people currently?
Yeah, I think the ability to have an opinion and know why you have it. So kind of always be able to question to yourself, am I making a statement, or am I communicating somebody else's idea without knowing like deep down inside and out why I believe and feel that.
So kind of
um
tracking your own thought process on opinions.
yeah, yes, and more so like why, right? Like how,
Yeah.
why would I think that, and like what's deep down inside. And I would say that there's really no wrong answer. You could just say, well, I think that because I want to get along with people and that's what everybody else thinks. But then even then, that should sort of challenge you to think, is that necessarily the best reason to think this? I think the other critical skill is to be able to take the other side of an argument
Yeah.
and like the opposite, the total opposite, and then work those ideas together. I think that's where you're going to get a really comprehensive view of of not only what do I think and why, but what do I actually know, versus what do I kind of think I know or feel like I know because I have a lot of friends or I social media is telling me I know a lot of these things, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's critically important. I think the other thing for young people to recognize is that uh, I'll say 35 and under.
Yeah.
We always talk about the tremendous opportunity that young people have. I am probably less inclined to offer that because I think I remember 2010 and the world kind of feels like 2010 again. Everybody is we've kind of been through, at least in the States, we've been through a recession in the last 3 years that they're not calling a recession, they're calling it something else, but it has been a recession, right? Everything past
Yeah.
pandemic has just been kind of upside down. And what we're seeing in a lot of ways too is a lack of direction. And so what I would tell young people is that this is a period, if it's like 2010, where you can really make one of three choices. You can either check out and just decide you're not going to make anything of yourself or do anything, which is a really bad bet for the future, right? Just kind of, I'm not even going to play the game. I'm going to retreat back into obscurity or nothingness, and I'm not going to do anything. Well, you can't win if you're not at the table. The second thing I would say, the second choice you can make, I think, is to kind of do a lot of small bets on yourself.
Mm.
Um, I think, if you are in the UK or anywhere else where you can kind of get a lot of places for not that much and see a lot more of the world, do that. Think about, I think right now, given what I wish I would have done early in my career was look at it much more as I'll call it a project-based early career.
Yeah.
And until you are actually entering the industry that you're in, um, I think you have a period, let's say 25 and under, where you can explore. You can work somewhere for 6 months, make enough money to go travel for 3 months, to then work at different, something similar but different, even contract or otherwise, for 6 months. And this is becoming, I think, more common and acceptable, with an exception. At some point, you need to be able to tell the story about why you did that, and then you need to be at that first job for a few years. And I think we are out of the age of job hopping and it's being acceptable to be somewhere for a year, year
Mm.
and a half. I think you're going to see a retreat back to, can somebody go work somewhere for a long enough period of time that some other reasonable person would assume that they were there long enough to get something done. And that period of time, at least in my view, is 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
So at some level, you gotta like get it out of your system and build that skill set, and you can kind of build a portfolio of projects earlier in your career, um, and match that with some other substantive adventure that accentuates what you're trying to do or where you think you're going. Um, the last one is, if you kind of know I'm all in on something, then
Mm.
I think the the stop loss on your career is has never been better, right? If you know what you want to do, you have the resources and opportunity to do it, just go all in and start doing it right now, because your ability to fail and have people kind of like not notice because they're so worried about their own lives, or your ability to thrive because people say, oh my gosh, he actually knows what he's doing, or she, they actually know what they're doing. And so many people do not. If you just kind of, you will stand out in a crowd. And so think about too, look around at the people you're with. If you are with a lot of people who don't know what they're doing, and you're with a lot of people who just kind of whine and complain about it's not fair, this and that, and they're not talking about ideas, they're talking about excuses, like, this is all the reasons why, not a lot of what ifs, then it's time to shake the etch a sketch and shift your network and shift the way that you're thinking. Think about the content you're consuming. I would say that that would be my last piece of advice is a lot of these issues and a lot of these questions are the same questions that young professionals have been asking and getting bad answers to uh, forever.
Yeah.
And I think the critical thing to remember is that this is not new. These questions are not without answer, but you have to put yourself at the intersection of preparation and luck. And sometimes that luck doesn't come, and sometimes you're not prepared when it does. And so the best thing that you can do is constantly be filling your mind with new information, new ideas, new ways of thinking, and keeping your head on a swivel for what looks like it's coming next. Instead of kind of looking down and then looking up, looking down at your feet and then one day looking up and saying, oh my gosh, the world I thought I was walking into is totally different and probably gone. And now I've kind of walked blindly down this path without knowing where we're going.
Okay. Thanks for being on the podcast, Baluch podcast. Thank you.